The morning chime reverberated through the dormitory, causing Zoran to stir reluctantly from his rest cycle. He stretched his 3 legs, one at a time, the blue tint of his skin rippling with annoyance as consciousness fully returned. The mandatory early assembly was the last thing he wanted to face today. Another primitive warfare lecture, he groaned, his voice translator, converting the series of clicks into standard Confederate speech. As if watching species discover projectile weapons for the 1,000th time will teach us anything new. From the adjacent pod, his roommate, Vex, emerged, metallic scales glistening under the artificial light. The reptilian cadet rolled his multifaceted eyes, which caught the light in a cascade of ruby reflections. "Maybe we'll get lucky, and it'll be about the fascinating discovery of the wheel," Vex replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Or perhaps fire. Revolutionary stuff." The corridor outside their dormitory was already filling with cadets of all forms, some hovering, others slithering, many walking on various configurations of limbs. The Galactic Military Academy housed over 2,000 cadets from 500 species, all training to lead the Confederacy's vast forces someday. The hallways buzzed with communication, verbal exchanges, telepathic broadcasts carefully contained within regulated frequencies, color pattern shifts on specialized skin, and pheromone bursts for those who communicated through chemical signals. Talia joined them as they made their way toward the central auditorium, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as she adjusted to the corridor's brightness. "I heard it's not just any primitive warfare lecture," she said. "Something about a quarantined planet in the Sol system." "Earth?" Zoran scoffed. "Combustion engines and basic nuclear fission? Hardly worth waking up early for." "Still," Talia mused, "they're listed as high caution in the registry. Seems excessive for a species that hasn't even mastered interplanetary travel." Vex snorted, a sound that made his scales ripple in amusement. "The classification system is outdated. Anything that discovers how to split atoms gets flagged, regardless of actual threat level." They filed into the massive amphitheater with hundreds of other cadets. Commander Pulox stood at the center platform, his 4 arms folded behind his back in the traditional stance of Confederate instruction. The exoskeleton that covered his torso gleamed with military insignia, each mark representing centuries of service. "Cadets, your attention," Pulox called out, voice amplified to reach every corner of the hall. The murmurs and clicks and telepathic chatter died down. Today's session concerns the species known as Homo sapiens from the planet Earth in the Sol system. Projected above him, a holographic image of a blue-green planet appeared, rotating slowly. Despite their primitive technology, currently limited to combustion engines, early nuclear reactions, and rudimentary space exploration, they remain classified as a high-caution species. A ripple of laughter spread through the auditorium. Zoran exchanged a glance with Vex, who was making the hand gesture that, across multiple species, translated roughly to, "What a waste of time." Commander Pulox raised a primary arm for silence. "I understand your skepticism. However, Earth's classification has confused our analysts for decades. Today, you will view classified historical footage that explains why." The lights dimmed completely. The holographic projector hummed to life, filling the air with a 3-dimensional recreation of an Earth landscape. Mud, barbed wire, and primitive fortifications stretched across a devastated terrain. First global conflict, circa 1914-1918 by their calendar. Commander Pulox narrated. "Observe carefully." The footage showed bipedal humans in dirty uniforms, huddled in trenches. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow as explosions rocked the earth around them. Some wore crude masks against clouds of yellowish gas that rolled across the battlefield. "Chemical warfare," Talia whispered, her voice containing a note of surprise. "Against their own species." The scene shifted to show soldiers climbing out of the trenches, running forward across an area designated no man's land, while machine guns cut them down in waves. Yet more followed, climbing over the bodies of the fallen. "Observe their eyes," Commander Pulax instructed. Confederate psychologists call this the 1,000-yard stare, a form of psychological collapse under stress. Note how it appears in nearly every soldier after mere weeks of combat. Zoran felt an unexpected chill along his spine. There was something unsettling about the hollow gaze of those human soldiers, something that contradicted the dismissive assessment he'd made minutes earlier. The hologram shifted again. New weapons appeared, larger explosive devices, armored vehicles that crawled across devastated landscapes, aircraft dropping bombs from above. Second global conflict, 1939 to 1945. Commander Pulax continued. Just 2 decades after the first. Note the accelerated weapons development. The footage showed cities reduced to rubble, civilians running from strafing aircraft, soldiers using increasingly sophisticated tools of destruction. Then came a blinding flash, followed by a mushroom cloud that towered into the stratosphere. Nuclear weaponry, Commander Pulax said flatly. Deployed against civilian population centers, twice, within 3 days. A stunned silence fell over the auditorium. Even Vex had stopped fidgeting with his scales. They used nuclear weapons on their own species. Talia's voice cracked slightly as she spoke. On civilian populations? Correct, Cadet, Commander Pulax confirmed. This is partially why Earth remains under quarantine. But there is more you must understand. The hologram changed again, showing a psychological profile of human soldiers. Statistics and behavioral analyses floated in the air, rotating for all to see. Most species, upon discovering the devastating potential of nuclear weapons, either destroy themselves entirely or immediately abandon warfare as a means of conflict resolution, Pulax explained. Humans did neither. Instead, they refined war into an art form. The hologram showed human soldiers in various scenarios, ambushed and outnumbered but forming defensive circles, charging into enemy fire to retrieve wounded comrades, continuing to fight despite catastrophic injuries. Confederate military strategists remain puzzled by the concept they call fighting to the last man. Pulax continued. When defeat is mathematically certain, most rational species surrender to preserve lives and resources. Humans, in statistically significant numbers, do not. That's illogical, said a voice from across the auditorium. Zoran recognized Pelora, a 6-limbed tactical specialist in her final year. Why sacrifice additional lives when the outcome is predetermined? An excellent question, Commander Pulax replied. Our behavioral scientists attribute it to an irrational emotional attachment to abstract concepts: freedom, homeland, comrades, honor. They will sacrifice their individual existence for these intangibles. The hologram shifted to a simulated battle scenario, a Confederate cruiser squadron engaging with primitive Earth spacecraft. Despite overwhelming technological superiority, the simulation showed human vessels executing kamikaze maneuvers, targeting vulnerable systems, and somehow, impossibly, achieving victory through sheer numerical sacrifice. Impossible, Zoran blurted out. Our technology is millennia ahead of theirs. Commander Pulax fixed his compound eyes on Zoran. These simulations are run through our most sophisticated predictive algorithms. Cadet. They account for technological disparity. What they cannot fully account for is the human willingness to absorb casualties at rates that would cause any Confederate species to surrender. The lights gradually returned to normal levels. The cadets sat in uncomfortable silence, the implications sinking in. We have observed 114 species develop nuclear capabilities, Commander Pulax said. 109 destroyed themselves within a decade. 4. Joined the Confederacy and abandoned warfare. Only humans developed nuclear weapons, used them, and then, instead of annihilation or enlightenment, continued refining their capacity for war while somehow avoiding self-extinction. Pulox shut down the holographic projector with a decisive gesture. You are dismissed. Consider what you have witnessed. There will be a follow-up session tomorrow. The cadets filed out in uncharacteristic silence. No telepathic chatter. No color-shifting conversation patterns. No pheromone exchanges. Just the soft sounds of various appendages against the floor. That night, the dormitory corridors were unusually quiet. Zoran sat on the edge of his rest pod, unable to settle into the relaxation cycle. Are you submitting a transfer request? Vex asked, his voice unusually subdued. The metallic scales along his neck had dulled, a sign of distress in his species. I'm considering it, Zoran admitted. Combat specialization suddenly seems inadequate. Down the corridor, they could see other cadets quietly filing electronic forms, transfers out of combat training, requests for reassignment to non-military divisions, even some outright resignations from the academy. It doesn't make sense, Talia said, entering their dormitory without the usual announcement protocol. Her 4 eyes blinked asynchronously, another sign of distress. Why would any species continue fighting when defeat is certain? Why sacrifice the self for abstract concepts? Perhaps that's why they're quarantined, Vex suggested. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're incomprehensible. The next morning, an unexpected announcement echoed through the academy. All cadets report to Special Auditorium C for classified Level 10 briefing. Authorization, Admiral Krav TZ. The designation sent a wave of murmurs through the corridors. Level 10 classification was reserved for information considered existentially significant to the Confederacy itself. Special Auditorium C was smaller than the main hall, with enhanced security and psychic dampening fields to prevent unauthorized transmission of sensitive information. Admiral Krav TZ stood at the center, a towering figure with a chitinous exoskeleton and multifaceted eyes that gleamed with ancient intelligence. Cadets, the Admiral began, his voice resonant with authority that came from millennia of service. Yesterday you viewed classified footage of human warfare. Today, I will show you what Commander Pulox omitted. The lights dimmed once more. The holographic projector activated, but instead of battlefields, it showed human rescue workers rushing into burning buildings to save trapped civilians. These humans are entering structures that have a 70% probability of complete collapse. Admiral Krav TZ noted. They have no genetic relationship to those they are saving. They receive no resource advantage from this behavior. The hologram shifted to show humans in white uniforms treating wounded individuals, not just their own kind, but enemy soldiers as well. Medical personnel treating all casualties regardless of affiliation, the Admiral explained. A concept they call medical neutrality, treating the wounded even if they were trying to kill you moments before. Next came footage of humans standing in front of tanks, empty-handed, facing certain death to protest injustice. One image lingered, a single human placing a flower into the barrel of a weapon aimed at their vital organs. Perhaps most incomprehensible to our analysts, Admiral Krav TZ continued, is their capacity for complete nonviolence in the face of overwhelming force. These protesters have a 94% probability of death, yet they stand firm for abstract principles. The hologram expanded to show massive human engineering projects, hospitals being constructed, space probes launched toward distant stars, the first tentative steps on their moon. It showed orchestras playing intricate music, dancers moving in coordination, scientists collaborating across borders. When natural disasters strike, Humans from unaffected regions volunteer by the thousands to help strangers, the Admiral noted, as the hologram showed relief efforts after earthquakes and floods. They form chains of assistance that can span their entire planet within hours. The lights slowly returned. Admiral Krav TZ surveyed the stunned cadets. The quarantine of Earth is not solely due to their capacity for violence, he explained. It is equally due to their capacity for self-sacrifice, cooperation, and moral courage that defies our predictive models. Commander Pulox showed you only half the truth, the half that would frighten you into compliance with Confederate military doctrine. The Admiral paced the platform, compound eyes scanning the audience. I showed you the other half because you deserve the complete picture. Humans are neither the monsters Pulox portrayed, nor the saints these latest images might suggest. They are both, simultaneously, existing in a state of moral duality that our analysts still struggle to comprehend. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Even the ambient systems seemed to have hushed. The true reason Earth remains under quarantine, Admiral Krav TZ continued, is not fear of their weapons. It is fear of their ideas. Concepts like universal rights, self-determination, and freedom of thought spread like viruses when introduced to Confederate systems. They have toppled more ancient empires than any fleet of warships. Zoran found himself leaning forward, absorbing every word. Some on the Confederate Council believe humans must remain isolated forever. Others believe selective contact might be possible someday. What no one disputes is that humanity represents the most significant ideological challenge the Confederacy has faced in 12,000 years. The Admiral deactivated his ceremonial insignia, a gesture that indicated he was speaking now, not as a commander, but as an individual, a rare occurrence in Confederate hierarchy. You are the next generation of Confederate leadership. Half of you have already submitted transfer requests away from combat specialization. I do not fault you for this, but I ask you to consider, perhaps understanding humans is more important than fearing them. For several moments, no one moved or spoke. Then Zoran stood up. Admiral, if humans are as adaptable as you suggest, couldn't they be better as allies than as subjects? The question hung in the air, its implications bordering on sedition by Confederate standards. But Admiral Krav TZ nodded thoughtfully. An insightful question. Cadet, the Council remains divided on this possibility. Talia rose next. Has there been any direct contact with Earth? Earth remains under quarantine, the Admiral replied. Our observation posts are cloaked and stationed at the edge of their solar system. Direct interaction is prohibited. Then Pelora, the tactical specialist, stood. Admiral, you present human compassion as if it were a threat. Could it not equally be seen as a strength the Confederacy might learn from? A murmur ran through the auditorium. This question challenged thousands of years of Confederate doctrine that prized collective stability over individual moral agency. That, Cadet Pelora, the Admiral said with what might have been the Confederate equivalent of a smile, is precisely the kind of question that makes humans dangerous. By evening, something remarkable had occurred. Hundreds of cadets had withdrawn their transfer and resignation applications. Not all, some remained too disturbed by human brutality to continue combat training, but many had found a new sense of purpose. In their dormitory, Zoran, Talia, and Vex sat together, processing the day's revelations. I've withdrawn my transfer request, Zoran said. I want to understand them better, Talia nodded. As have I. The Admiral is right. Fear is an insufficient response to something so complex. Vex's scales had regained their luster, shifting through patterns that indicated deep thought. If humans ever achieve interstellar travel, they already have rudimentary probes beyond their solar system, Talia pointed out. Primitive, but persistent. Then contact is inevitable, Zoran concluded. Better we understand them than fear them blindly. In his private quarters, Admiral Krav TZ reviewed the day's outcomes with satisfaction. Of the nearly 1,000 cadets who had submitted transfer requests after Pulox's presentation, over 600 had withdrawn them following the second viewing. More importantly, a small group of particularly insightful cadets, including Zoran, Talia, Vex, and Pelora, had asked the kinds of questions that suggested they might someday form the nucleus of a specialized division dedicated to understanding Earth. The Admiral activated a secure communication channel to the Confederate Council. The experiment proceeded as anticipated, he reported. I've identified 43 candidates for the Earth Diplomatic Corps initiative. There was a pause before the Council responded. And the others? Those who withdrew from combat training will serve the Confederacy in other capacities, the Admiral replied. Those who remained demonstrate the capacity for nuanced thinking we require. Very good, came the response. Continue monitoring. As the communication ended, Admiral Krav TZ turned to the viewport that offered a distant view of Earth's sun, a tiny pinpoint of light among billions. Unlike what he had told the cadets, first contact was no longer a hypothetical future scenario. 3 human spacecraft had already detected Confederate observation posts. It was only a matter of time before they attempted communication. The question that would determine the fate of both civilizations was no longer if humans would join the galactic community, but how. And that would depend largely on whether the Confederacy approached them with fear or understanding. The Admiral made a decision. He would accelerate the training of cadets like Zoran and Talia. Their capacity to see beyond Confederate doctrine, to question authority, to recognize value in alien perspectives. These were precisely the qualities needed for the delicate task ahead. In the grand cycle of galactic civilizations, first contact often determined thousands of years of subsequent relations. War or peace, cooperation or subjugation, mutual growth or mutual destruction, all rested on those initial interactions. For the first time in 12,000 years, Admiral Krav TZ felt something akin to uncertainty about the Confederacy's course. But there was something else too, a sensation the humans might have called hope. Dawn was breaking over the academy as Zoran finally entered his rest cycle. Through the viewport near his pod, he could see the distant stars, knowing now that one of them hosted a species that defied all Confederate logic, capable of both unimaginable cruelty and transcendent compassion, often in the same moment. The paradoxical species, he murmured to himself as sleep began to take him. It seemed a fitting designation for the creatures called humans. In the morning, he would begin preparing for a future he could never have imagined yesterday. A future where understanding humanity might be the most important mission in the galaxy. The orbital station continued its silent rotation above the Confederacy's capital world, its thousands of inhabitants unaware that, light years away, a primitive probe bearing human music, human art, and human greetings was about to trigger the proximity alarms on a Confederate outpost. The journey to comprehension had only just begun. Talia stood in the observation deck, all 4 of her eyes focused on a simulation of Earth's solar system. It's so small, she mused. Their entire civilization contained within one planetary system. Size isn't everything, Vex replied, his scales rippling with amusement at his own joke. They managed to develop moral philosophy, art, and nuclear weapons without ever leaving their planet's surface for most of their history. That's what makes them dangerous, Pelora said, joining them unexpectedly. Her tactical analysis implants glowed softly beneath her skin. They evolved in isolation, without the moderating influence of Confederate values. Or perhaps, Zoran suggested, they evolved perspectives we never considered because of our interconnectedness. Maybe isolation breeds innovation. The thought hung between them, challenging centuries of Confederate doctrine that valued conformity and consensus above all. The following days brought a new intensity to their training. Admiral Krav TZ had personally selected 43 cadets for specialized briefings on human psychology, history, and cultural development. They studied Earth's fragmentary broadcasts, analyzed their literature, debated their philosophical traditions. Their concept of individual rights, Talia noted during one session, directly contradicts Confederate principles of collective harmony. Yet they've achieved remarkable cooperation despite this contradiction, Zoran countered. Perhaps individual agency and collective purpose aren't mutually exclusive. Each revelation about humanity seemed to generate more questions than answers. Their capacity for tribalism and their ability to transcend it. Their technological progress despite constant warfare. Their willingness to die for strangers and ideals. 2 weeks after the initial viewings, a new announcement echoed through the Academy. Special Response Team Alpha, report to Tactical Planning Chamber immediately. Level 12 classification. Zoran, Talia, Vex, and Pelora exchanged glances. They were part of Alpha Team, the core group Admiral Krav TZ had been grooming for Earth specialization. The Tactical Planning Chamber was a secure facility buried deep within the station's core. As they entered, they found Admiral Krav TZ standing before a holographic display of the solar system's outer reaches. 26 standard hours ago, the Admiral began without preamble. A Confederate monitoring station detected this. The hologram zoomed in to show a primitive spacecraft, little more than a box with extended solar panels and a dish antenna. A human probe, Pelora identified immediately. Voyager class, if I recall my briefing correctly. Precisely, the Admiral confirmed. This particular vessel was launched in the late 20th century by their calendar. It has been traveling through space for nearly 5 of their decades. Has it detected our monitoring station? Zoran asked, feeling a chill of anticipation. Yes. The single word fell like a stone into still water. And it has altered its transmission pattern in response. The humans know they are not alone. The implications were enormous. Confederate doctrine mandated immediate destruction of any unauthorized contact with quarantined species. Yet this probe had been allowed to detect their presence. You've deviated from protocol, Talia observed, her 4 eyes narrowing slightly. I have, Admiral Krav TZ acknowledged. The Confederate Council is divided on how to proceed. Some advocate destroying the probe and reinforcing the quarantine. Others suggest this accidental contact provides an opportunity for controlled introduction. And what do you believe, Admiral? Vex asked, his scales shifting to a pattern that indicated intense curiosity. I believe, the Admiral said carefully, that humanity will achieve interstellar travel within the next century, regardless of our actions. Better to shape that encounter than react to it. He gestured, and the hologram expanded to show Earth itself, a blue-green sphere teeming with life and technological signatures. Your team has been selected for a unique assignment. You will analyze all available data on human first contact protocols, develop prediction models for their response to Confederate revelation, and prepare contingency strategies for various scenarios. You're planning deliberate contact, Zoran realized. I am planning for inevitability, the Admiral corrected. The quarantine has served its purpose. It has given us time to study humanity from a distance. But that time is ending, one way or another. For several hours, they discussed the parameters of their assignment. They would have access to all Confederate intelligence on Earth, unlimited computational resources, and direct communication with the Admiral himself. Unprecedented authority for cadets who had not yet completed their training. As they finally departed the chamber, Zoran found himself filled with a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. The enormity of their task was daunting, yet also exhilarating. They would be the architects of first contact with the most unpredictable species the Confederacy had ever encountered. "Do you think they're ready?" Vex asked, as they made their way back to the dormitories. "Humans. I mean, for the truth about the galaxy." "I don't know," Zoran admitted, "but I'm not sure it matters. Admiral Krav TZ is right. They'll achieve interstellar capability soon enough. The question isn't whether they're ready for us, but whether we're ready for them." Talia's eyes blinked in sequence, her species equivalent of a thoughtful nod. "Their duality still troubles me. How can we predict the reaction of a species that celebrates both violence and compassion, that values both individual freedom and collective welfare?" "Perhaps we're asking the wrong question," Pelora suggested. "Instead of trying to predict which aspect of their nature will respond, we should consider how our approach might influence which aspect emerges." The insight stopped them all, mid-stride. "You're suggesting our method of contact could determine whether we meet their warriors or their diplomats," Zoran said slowly. "Exactly. If we appear threatening, we will encounter the humanity that survived 2 world wars. If we appear peaceful, we might meet the humanity that sends doctors into disaster zones." It was a revolutionary thought, the idea that Confederate actions could influence which face of humanity they encountered. Traditional doctrine held that species had fixed natures, one prepared for their worst tendencies and hoped for their best. But what if humanity's dual nature meant they became what they beheld? If they saw the Confederacy as a threat, they would respond with the tenacity and sacrifice that had made their warfare so terrifying. If they saw the Confederacy as a potential ally, they might extend the same compassion they showed their own kind. "We need to completely rethink first contact protocols," Vex said, his scales now pulsing with excitement. "Everything in the manual assumes a consistent response pattern." Through the viewport beside them, Earth's sun was just visible, a distant point of light, harboring a species that defied Confederate categorization. A species that might, depending on how they were approached, become the Confederacy's greatest ally or its most formidable adversary. That night, Zoran couldn't enter his rest cycle. His mind raced with possibilities, with the weight of responsibility their team now carried. The fate of 2 civilizations might hinge on their recommendations. He made his way to the observation deck, surprised to find Admiral Krav TZ already there, gazing out at the stars. "Unable to rest, Cadet?" the Admiral asked without turning. "Yes, sir. The implications of our assignment are overwhelming." "As they should be." The Admiral's compound eyes reflected the starlight. "Few in Confederate history have faced a challenge of this magnitude." "May I ask a personal question, Admiral?" "You may." "Why us? We're not even graduated cadets. Surely there are specialists with decades of experience better suited to this task." Admiral Krav TZ was silent for a long moment. "Experience can be a limitation as well as an asset, Cadet Zoran. Those who have spent their careers within Confederate doctrine struggle to comprehend humanity's contradictions. You and your teammates have demonstrated a capacity for flexible thinking, for embracing paradox. That is precisely what this situation requires." The Admiral turned from the viewport to face him directly. "There is another reason. In your response to the footage, you showed neither blind fear nor naive admiration. You recognized both the danger and the potential of human duality. That balanced perspective is rare and essential." "What happens if the Council rejects our recommendations?" Zoran asked. "Then we will adapt, as we must," the Admiral replied. "But I believe the evidence we assemble will be compelling. The Confederacy has survived for millennia by evolving when necessary, despite our appearance of rigid tradition." As dawn approached, Zoran finally returned to his dormitory. Talia, Vex, and Pelora were already awake, gathered around a holographic projection of Earth's languages and communication patterns. "Couldn't sleep either," Vex asked, his scales showing the pattern for wry amusement. "Too much at stake," Zoran admitted. "But I think I've realized something important." They looked at him expectantly. "We've been approaching this as if we're studying an alien species," he said. "And of course, humans are alien to us. But what if we tried to understand them as they understand themselves, not as subjects to be analyzed, but as potential equals with their own valid perspective on the universe?" Talia's four eyes widened slightly. "That would be unprecedented in Confederate protocol." "So is everything about this situation," Pelora pointed out. "Standard protocol would have us destroy that probe and reinforce the quarantine." "Exactly," Zoran said. "Admiral Krav Tza has already broken with tradition by allowing the contact to stand. Perhaps that's a signal that we should break with traditional analysis as well." Vex's scales shifted to the deep azure that indicated serious contemplation. "What would that even look like? To understand humans as they understand themselves?" "It means engaging with their art, their philosophy, their debates about their own nature," Zoran suggested. "Not just observing them as specimens, but encountering their self-reflection." For the next several days, they immersed themselves in human cultural outputs. They read Earth's great philosophical works, from Aristotle to Zhuangzi. They studied their religions, their ethical debates, their endless questioning of their own nature and purpose. What emerged was a picture more complex than any Confederate analysis had acknowledged. Humans didn't just behave in contradictory ways. They were acutely aware of their contradictions. They wrestled with them constantly, argued about them, created art exploring the tensions between their capacity for cruelty and kindness. "They're not oblivious to their duality," Talia realized as they reviewed human literature dealing with war and peace. "They're obsessed with it. It defines their self-perception. And they've developed sophisticated ethical systems precisely because they recognize their destructive potential," Pelora added. "Their greatest thinkers have spent millennia trying to channel their nature toward cooperation rather than conflict." When they finally presented their findings to Admiral Krav Tz, their recommendation was unanimous: direct, transparent contact with humanity, framed as an invitation rather than an imposition. "We believe," Zoran explained as their presentation concluded, "that approaching humans with honesty and respect for their agency is most likely to engage their cooperative tendencies rather than their defensive ones." The Admiral studied their detailed analysis, the psychological profiles, the historical precedents from Earth's own first contact scenarios in their fiction and philosophical speculation. "The Council will require convincing," he said finally. "Many will see this approach as dangerously naive." "With respect, Admiral," Pelora interjected, "we believe the truly naive approach would be expecting deception to work on a species that has spent its existence questioning motives and intentions. Humans are hyper-vigilant about threats, but they respond to genuine overtures with surprising openness." Admiral Krav Tz's compound eyes seemed to gleam with something that might have been approval. "I will present your recommendations at the next council session. Prepare for significant resistance, but also know that you have allies among the elder members who have been studying Earth for centuries." 3 cycles later, they received word that the Council had approved a modified version of their proposal. Initial contact would be established not through direct visitation, but through a transmission to the Voyager probe, a simple mathematical sequence that would confirm intelligent origin without revealing Confederate capabilities or location. "It is a small first step," the Admiral told them when delivering the news. "But it represents a fundamental shift in Confederate policy toward quarantined species. For the first time in our history, We are initiating contact, rather than waiting for it to become inevitable. Zoran and his team were given the honor of crafting the transmission itself, a series of prime numbers, followed by basic physical constants that would be recognizable to human scientists as deliberately created rather than random cosmic noise. As they gathered in the communication center to send the signal, Zoran felt the weight of history upon them. This simple transmission would forever alter the course of two civilizations. "Ready?" Talia asked, her 4 eyes fixed on the control panel. "As ready as we'll ever be," Vex replied, his scales shifting through patterns that suggested both anxiety and anticipation. Pelora completed the final calculations. Transmission path optimized. The signal will reach Voyager in approximately 7 hours. Zoran took a deep breath, then activated the transmission. Message away. The simple string of numbers and constants streamed out across the void, racing toward the tiny human probe that had unwittingly triggered this momentous decision. "And now we wait," Admiral Krav TZ said from behind them. They hadn't realized he had entered the communication center. "How long until we might expect a response, sir?" Zoran asked. "If they follow the pattern of their previous deep space communications, between 40 and 60 hours for their scientists to verify the signal, debate its significance, and formulate a reply." The Admiral's voice contained a note none of them had heard before, something almost like excitement. "We have set in motion events that cannot be reversed. The question now is not whether humanity will join the galactic community, but how." As they filed out of the communication center, Zoran found himself pausing to look once more at the view screen showing Earth's solar system, a tiny island of life in the cosmic ocean, home to a species that might reshape the Confederacy's understanding of itself. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked Talia as they walked back toward their dormitory. She considered the question, all 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "I don't know if there is a right thing in this situation, but I believe we chose the path most likely to lead to mutual understanding rather than conflict." "And if we're wrong," Vex interjected, his scales showing the pattern for genuine concern. "If humanity responds with fear or aggression, then we adapt," Pelora said firmly. As Admiral Krav TZ said, "The Confederacy has survived by evolving when necessary. Perhaps this is such a moment." In his quarters that night, Zoran reviewed human first contact narratives, their speculative fiction about meeting alien life. What struck him most was the diversity of scenarios they imagined, from peaceful exchange to existential threat. Humans had spent centuries preparing themselves psychologically for this moment, exploring every possible outcome through their art and literature. Perhaps that was their greatest strength, not their technology, or their capacity for violence, or even their compassion, but their endless ability to imagine alternatives, to consider possibilities, to prepare for the unknown. The Confederacy, for all its power and ancient wisdom, had grown comfortable with certainty. Humans thrived in uncertainty. They had evolved on a planet of constant change and challenge, developing a flexibility of mind that might prove their most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. 53 hours after their transmission, the reply came. The 4 cadets were summoned urgently to the communication center, where Admiral Krav TZ awaited them alongside several council observers who had arrived via instantaneous transport, an indication of the event's significance. "The humans have responded," the Admiral announced without preamble, "and in a manner none of our predictive models anticipated." The main screen activated to display the incoming transmission, instead of a simple mathematical response as Confederate protocols would have dictated. The humans had sent something entirely different: music. The haunting strains of a stringed instrument filled the communication center, followed by vocal harmonies in multiple human languages. Along with the music came images, children playing, elderly humans smiling, natural landscapes, artistic creations. They've essentially duplicated the contents of their Voyager Golden Record, Pelora observed, referencing the information package humans had included on their probe decades earlier. But with one addition. At the end of the transmission was a simple phrase, repeated in the 100 most widely spoken human languages. "We are here. We are listening. We come in peace." The council observers exchanged glances, their various physiological indicators showing confusion, concern, and in some cases, fascination. This response defies standard first contact protocol. One observer noted, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing with disapproval. It reveals emotional content rather than rational assessment. Perhaps, Admiral Krav TZ suggested. That is precisely the point. They are showing us who they are, not just that they can decode a mathematical sequence. Zoran studied the transmission with growing excitement. They're inviting dialogue on their terms, personal, cultural, emotional, not just an exchange of data but an exchange of meaning. It's consistent with our analysis of their values, Talia added. They prioritize connection and mutual understanding alongside technical communication. The council observers continued their debate, some arguing for caution, others for enthusiasm. But the decision had already been made the moment they had sent the initial signal. The path forward was clear: continued dialogue, gradually increasing in complexity and depth. Over the following weeks, the exchange with the Voyager probe continued. The humans sent more music, more art, more expressions of their nature and values. The Confederacy, following the recommendations of Zoran's team, responded in kind, sharing not just mathematical principles, but cultural artifacts, philosophical concepts, expressions of Confederate diversity. "They're ready for more," Zoran reported, after analyzing the latest human transmission. "They've begun asking direct questions about our physiology, our societies, our history." Admiral Krav TZ nodded thoughtfully. "The Council has approved the next phase. We will reveal our observation post at the edge of their solar system, allow them to see us, while maintaining sufficient distance for security." "And after that?" Talia asked. "After that," the Admiral said, "we begin the process of formal diplomatic contact. The quarantine of Earth will be gradually lifted, with carefully managed cultural exchange programs to start." As the plans took shape, Zoran found himself assigned to lead the cultural orientation team, cadets who would prepare for eventual face-to-face meetings with human representatives. It was an extraordinary responsibility for one who had not yet completed his academy training. But the Admiral had been insistent. Those who first recognized humanity's dual nature should be the ones to bridge our worlds, he had said. On the night before the Confederate observation post was scheduled to reveal itself to Earth's telescopes, Zoran, Talia, Vex, and Pelora gathered in the observation deck, looking out at the distant star that was Earth's sun. "It's strange to think," Vex mused, his scales showing the pattern for philosophical reflection, "that just weeks ago, we were watching footage of their wars and questioning their sanity. And now we're preparing to welcome them into the galactic community," Talia added. "Life contains unexpected turns." "The real work is just beginning," Pelora cautioned. "Humans won't abandon their contradictions simply because they've met us. They'll bring their duality into every interaction, every negotiation, every cultural exchange." "That's precisely why this matters," Zoran said. "The Confederacy has achieved stability, security, technological mastery. But at what cost? Perhaps what we need most is precisely what humans offer: the challenge of contradiction, the creative tension between individual and collective, the capacity to question even our most fundamental assumptions." Admiral Krav TZ joined them, moving silently across the observation deck. "Well said, Cadet Zoran. The Council has been debating precisely this question: whether humanity represents a threat to Confederate stability or an opportunity for Confederate growth. "And what conclusion have they reached, Admiral?" Talia asked. "That it is both," the Admiral replied, compound eyes reflecting the starlight. "Just as humans themselves are both warriors and healers, both destroyers and creators. Their integration into galactic society will bring both challenge and opportunity. The wise path is not to fear this duality, but to embrace it, to allow it to catalyze our own evolution." The Admiral's communication device chimed softly. He checked it, then looked up at the 4 cadets. "It is time. The observation post is decloaking. In approximately 20 minutes, Earth's astronomical instruments will detect its presence. History is being made, and you 4 are at its center." They stood together in silence, watching the distant point of light that was Sol. Somewhere around that star, human astronomers were about to have their worldview shattered forever. And here, on this Confederate station, 4 cadets who had once mocked primitive species were preparing to welcome them as equals. The journey from fear to understanding had been remarkably swift. In just weeks, they had moved from viewing humans as an incomprehensible threat to recognizing them as complex potential allies. But Zoran understood that this was just the beginning, that true comprehension would require years, perhaps lifetimes, of cultural exchange and mutual learning. "To the paradoxical species," Vex said, raising a ceremonial drinking vessel in the human custom of a toast they had studied. "May their contradictions enrich us all." "To humanity," the others echoed, completing the ritual. As they continued their vigil, Zoran reflected on how profoundly his perspective had changed since that morning when he had groaned about attending a primitive warfare lecture. The universe had suddenly become both more complex and more fascinating, filled not just with technological challenges but with philosophical ones, not just with threats to be managed but with differences to be celebrated. Whatever came next, whether peaceful exchange or complicated negotiation or even the conflicts that seemed to follow humans wherever they went, the Confederacy would never be the same, and neither would he. The stars continued their eternal dance outside the viewport, indifferent to the momentous events unfolding among the tiny beings who studied them. But for those beings, human and Confederate alike, the universe had just become immeasurably richer. The paradoxical species was about to join the galactic community, and in that joining, both would be transformed.